USS Constellation, a Kitty Hawk Euro-class supercarrier, was the third ship of the United States Navy to be named in honor of the new constellation of stars on the flag of the United States and the only naval vessel ever authorized to display red, white, and blue designation numbers. One of the fastest ships in the Navy, as proven by her victory during a battlegroup race held in 1985, she was nicknamed Connie by her crew and officially as America's flagship. The contract to build Constellation was awarded to the New York Naval Shipyard, Brooklyn, New York, on July 1, 1956, and her keel was laid down September 14, 1957 at the New York Navy Yard. She was launched October 8, 1960, sponsored by Mary Herter. Constellation was delivered to the Navy October 1, 1961, and commissioned October 27, 1961, with Captain T.J. Walker in command. At that time, she had cost about $264.5 million. Constellation was the last U.S. aircraft carrier to be built at a yard other than Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. As of early 2015, Constellation was at the scrap yard in Brownsville, Texas, awaiting her fate. History = fire during construction = The USS Constellation was heavily damaged by fire while under construction on December 19, 1960. The carrier was in the final stages of construction at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Brooklyn, New York when the fire began. The fire broke out when a forklift operating on the hangar deck accidentally pushed its cargo into a steel plate, knocking it over. The plate then broke off the plug of a 500 US gallons tank of diesel fuel which spilled from the container, reaching the lower levels of the ship. The fuel was ignited perhaps by a cutting torch of a fitter, and then moved to a wooden scaffolding. The flames spread quickly, filling the passageways of the ship with smoke. A Navy commander commented on the nature of the ship's design at an inquiry. OE ships of this class are the most complex structures ever designed by man. It took 17 hours for firefighters to extinguish the fire, some of whom had been driven to the raw edge of exhaustion after being called into service in the Park Slope air accident. The firefighters saved hundreds of lives without losing any of their own, however 50 shipyard workers perished. The extensive damage cost $75 million to repair, and delayed the commissioning date by 7 months, leading to a rumor that the ship that had burned in New York was Kitty Hawk, and the fire caused the Navy to change the names and hull number designations between the two sister ships that were being built simultaneously in separate shipyards in separate states. An abstract of a New York Times article from the day after the fire, December 20, 1960, refers to the ship as USS Constellation. 1960 1969 Following fitting out and acceptance trials, Constellation departed her home port of Norfolk, Virginia, on February 7, 1962 for initial air operations off the Virginia Capes. She conducted her first catapult launch and arrested landing the same day with Commander George C. Watkins, Air Group 13 commander, at the controls of an A-4D-2 Skyhawk of Attack Squadron 34. After a month of operating locally, Connie conducted a 2-month shakedown cruise in the Caribbean. In summer 1962, Constellation was transferred to the U.S. Pacific Fleet and CVG-13 was disestablished. For the 2-month trip around Cape Horn to her new home port of San Diego, California, Connie embarked elements of CVG-5 and departed Mayport, FLA, on July 25. In November, Constellation, with CVG-14 on board, commenced workup exercises for her upcoming maiden deployment to the Western Pacific as a component of the U.S. 7th Fleet. The uneventful cruise took place from February to September 1963. Constellation Euro-Sh's second deployment began on May 5, 1964. She relieved Kitty Hawk on station in the Gulf of Tonkin off Vietnam on June 8, embarked Carrier Air Wing 14 and flew armed photo reconnaissance missions over Laos until July 13. Following an upkeep period at Subic Bay, Philippines, Constellation reached Hong Kong for a port visit on July 27, but within a few days was called back into action. As a result of orders received during the first day of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Constellation got underway and headed towards the Gulf of Tonkin. On August 4, the Constellation launched F-4B Phantom IIs to join aircraft from Ticonderoga in providing air cover over the destroyers which were alleged by the Johnson administration to have been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. On August 5 both carriers launched airstrikes on a North Vietnamese oil facility and naval vessels. CV-14 lost 2 aircraft, an A-1 Sky Raider, piloted by Lieutenant Richard C. Sather, who was killed in action, and an A-4 Skyhawk flown by Lieutenant Everett Alvarez, Jr., who became one of America's first prisoners of war of the Vietnam War. Operations returned to a more normal cycle for the remainder of the deployment, and Constellation returned to San Diego on February 1, 1965, ending a nearly 9-month cruise. Connie and CV-14 were awarded a Navy Unit Commendation for the early August operations. During the deployment, Constellation appears to have been under the direction of Commander Carrier Division 9. A first shipyard period for Constellation followed, lasting 8 months. Then workups commenced for her first full-blown war cruise. The carrier, with CV-15 on board, was underway for operations off Vietnam in May 1966. During 111 days on station, aircraft from Constellation pounded roads, bridges and other targets, attempting to impede the flow of men and war materials south. The F-4B air crew of pilot Lieutenant William M. McGunigan and radar intercept officer Lieutenant Robert M. Fowler from Fighter Squadron 161 shot down a MiG-17 fighter jet on July 13, marking the Schiper unregistered trademark S first MiG kill of the war. Connie returned to San Diego in December after her 7-month combat cruise, having lost 16 aircrewmen and 15 aircraft. Subsequently, both Constellation and CV-15 were awarded a NUC for this deployment. After a short workup cycle, Constellation A-Euro's third combat deployment commenced in April 1967. With CV-14 embarked, the carrier operated first on Dixie Station off South Vietnam, with strikes in the Iron Triangle region, and then moved north to Yankee Station off North Vietnam, for a total of 121 days on the line. Reflecting the intensive nature of air operations, F-4Bs of VFs 142 and 143 accounted for 4 MiG kills. The 8-month deployment ended in December, having totaled losses of 16 aircraft and 20 personnel, including 7 Kias and 8 POWs. Both the carrier and CV-14 received a NUC. The Constellation began her 4th deployment to the Western Pacific and Vietnam on May 29, 1968. During this deployment, the Constellation CV-14 team was restricted to strikes below the 20th parallel of North Vietnam as a result of a March presidential order. On November 1, as directed by President Johnson, all bombing of North Vietnam was halted at 2100 Saigon time. The last Navy mission over the restricted area was flown earlier in the day by CMDR Kenneth Yenny in an A-7 Corsair II. The Connie returned to Homaporto on January 31, 1969, after flying more than 11,000 combat and support missions and dropping almost 20,000 tons of ordnance. 15 aircraft were destroyed, 9 due to enemy action. 6 aircrew members perished, 5 were listed as Kias and 3 were taken as POWs. By August, it was time for Connie to return to Vietnam for a 5th combat deployment, again with CV-14. Following an initial 20-day period of supporting strikes in South Vietnam as well as Laos, Constellation sailed to defend a station in the Sea of Japan, which had been created as a result of increased tensions on the Korean peninsula. A return to Yankee Station on November 1 also produced a major milestone in the carrier's life when the F-4J air crew of Air Wing Skipper Commander A.K. Billings and Lieutenant Jeff Taylor of VF-143 conducted Connie's 100,000th arrested landing. During a mission on March 28, 1970, the VF-142 F-4 crew of Lieutenant Jerome E. Beaulieu and Lieutenant Stephen J. Barkley downed a North Vietnamese MiG-21 jet fighter. Following a total of 128 days on the line, Connie's 9-month deployment ended in May, with with CVW-14 suffering the loss of 7 total aircraft, 5 to enemy action. 1 aircrewman was taken as a POW, but there were no fatalities. 1970 Euro 1979 Upon her return, Constellation began a 9-month major shipyard overhaul, her second since commissioning. In spring 1971 she welcomed aboard a new O-wing, CV-9, and departed San Diego on October 1 for what would become a historic combat deployment. Air operations commenced with strikes against mainly logistic targets in Laos as well as reconnaissance missions over North Vietnam into 1972. On January 19, the VF-96 F-4 Phantom crew of Lieutenant Randall H. Duke Cunningham and Lieutenant William P. Driscoll scored a kill against a MiG-21, the first for a Navy aircraft since Connie SVF-142 kill on March 28, 1970. The carrier was nearing the end of her scheduled deployment when her tour was extended to meet the threat posed by the North Vietnamese Easter Offensive of March 30, 1972. Initial airstrikes in support of ground troops were followed by a new, more intensive series of airstrikes against major targets in North Vietnam. On May 8, the same VF-96 aircrew team of Cunningham and Driscoll scored against a MiG-17. Then on May 10, Cunningham and Driscoll downed 3 MiG-17s, becoming the first aces of the Vietnam War. 3 more MiG-17s were downed by 2 other VF-96 crews, 2 by Lieutenant Michael J. Connolly and Lieutenant Thomas J. Blinsky and 1 by Lieutenant Stephen C. Shoemaker and Lieutenant Keith V. Crenshaw. Adding to the score, VF-92 aircrew Lieutenant Kurt Dose and Lieutenant Commander James McDevitt shot down a MiG-21. All told, Constellation flyers shot down 7 MiGs on May 10. The 9-month deployment ended on July 1, the carrier having spent 154 days off Vietnam. 7 aircraft were lost, 2 aircrewmen were reported killed and 2 became POWs. The Constellation CV-9 team received the Presidential Unit Citation for their outstanding efforts. Constellation was the focus of media attention when black members of her crew protested what they saw as disparate treatment by the Navy, leading to what some saw as an aborted mutiny in late 1972. Constellation returned to the United States on July 1 and prepared to return to the Western Pacific in early 1973. Replacement personnel reported aboard while Constellation was in the United States until the ship had 250 more men than the ship's berthing could accommodate. Constellation's commanding officer ordered administrative discharges for 5 black sailors he considered troublemakers. He planned to give early discharges to another 250 men whose enlistments would expire while Constellation was overseas. While Constellation was conducting exercises off the California coast, a rumor started that the captain was going to give 250 less than honorable discharges to black sailors. On November 1, black sailors waylaid a white mess cook in a passageway and broke his jaw. The captain scheduled an open meeting for 2100 November 3 to clarify the 250 planned discharges. At noon November 3 a group of 50 black sailors began a sit-in on a portion of the mess deck. On the night of 3 November 4 60 black sailors took control of the scheduled meeting, refused to leave the mess deck, and threatened to tear up the ship. Constellation returned to San Diego on November 4 to offload 130 men, including 12 white sailors, before returning to sea. Constellation returned to San Diego on November 7 and the offloaded sailors were transported back to the dock on November 9, but only 8 boarded their ship. The remaining sailors sat down on the dock to be filmed by television crews and were ultimately transferred to shore stations for mast. 12 received general discharges, 35 were honorably discharged but not recommended for re-enlistment, and 73 received punishments ranging from loss of pay and reduction in rate to warnings prior to being reassigned to sea duty. In January 1973, Constellation headed back to Southeast Asia. The Paris Peace Accords took effect on January 28, but CV-9 aircraft continued to strike targets in Laos until a ceasefire in that country was called on February 21. Thus Connie, which had been on station at the beginning of combat operations in Vietnam in 1964, was on station at the end, 9 years later. The remainder of the 9-month deployment consisted largely of flights in support of mine clearing operations in North Vietnam. Upon her return in October 1973, Constellation enjoyed a 9-month workup cycle, and departed in June 1974 for her first peacetime deployment in 10 years. On November 23, she became the first carrier to enter the Persian Gulf since 1949. The 6-month cruise ended on December 24, 1974. A 14-month major overhaul and upgrade at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, WASH, commenced in February 1975, during which Constellation was modified to reflect the Navy's new multi-purpose air, surface and anti-submarine warfare role for carriers. She was redesignated a CV on June 30, 1975. With the overhaul completed in April 1976, Connie could now operate both the new S-3A Viking and F-14A Tomcat. However, the workups uncovered problems, and a 26-day dry docking in late 1976 at Long Beach Naval Shipyard, Calif., was required. The highlight for the remaining workup cycle was participation in Rim of the Pacific multinational exercises held in and around the Hawaiian Islands. An uneventful April to November 1977 deployment, Connie S 10th, to the Far East followed. Constellation S next deployment, from September 1978 to May 1979, was originally scheduled to end in March but was extended due to her sortie into the Indian Ocean in reaction to a political crisis in Yemen. Following a relatively short 8-month turnaround cycle, she was underway again in February 1980 under the command of Captain Leonid Newsn. After participating in RIMPAC exercises, Constellation steamed westward to the Arabian Sea, where Gonzo Station had been established following the November 1979 takeover of the American Embassy in Tehran, Iran. Connie had reached the eastern Indian Ocean when the unsuccessful April 24, 1980 raid to free American hostages took place, and she relieved Coral Sea on Gonzo Station on May 1. This at-sea period would last a record-setting 110 days. As a result, the crew of Constellation was awarded the Navy Expeditionary Medal for their service. The deployment ended in mid-October. 1980 1989 During the 1981 workup cycle, President Ronald Reagan visited Constellation on August 20, 1981 and proclaimed the carrier America's flagship while presenting the crew a presidential flag and announcing to the crew, "Let friend and foe alike know that America has the muscle to back up its words, and ships like this and men like you are that muscle." Under the command of Captain Dennis M. Brooks, USN Connie sailed to the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean from October 1981 to May 1982. In January 1983, Constellation entered the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard for a 13-month complex overhaul, during which the ship's Terrier missile system was replaced with NATO Sea Sparrow. The Phalanx close-in weapon system was added and modifications were made to allow the carrier to operate the new FA-18A Hornet strike aircraft. Connie deployed from February to August 1985 with CVW-14 embarked, marking the first deployment for the FA-18. It was during this deployment that the Connie gained her motto, "Go ahead, make my day," which was painted on the ship's island. A direct quote from President Ronald Reagan in response to terrorist threats made against the Connie when she responded to the American hostage crisis of 1985 TWA Flight 847. For their performance in 1985, Connie S crew earned the prestigious Meritorious Unit Commendation, and the ship herself received the Secretary of the Navy's Environmental Protection Award. As preparations for a 1987 deployment proceeded, it was announced that Constellation had earned the coveted Pacific Fleet Battle Efficiency Award for the 18-month period ending on June 30, 1986. During an April to October 1987 deployment, Connie conducted air operations in support of Operation Earnest Will, the escorting of reflagged Kuwaiti tankers in the Persian Gulf as a result of Iranian attacks against international shipping. As a result, the crew of Constellation was awarded the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal for their service. On the morning of August 2, 1988, Connie quietly slipped her moorings for a routine 2-week carrier qualification off the coast of Southern California. Things quickly turned out to be anything but routine. The ship had barely cleared the harbor when a JP-5 fuel leak in the uptakes rained down to No. 1 main machinery room and erupted into a full-blown conflagration that tore through the uptakes and spread throughout the ship. The fuel oil supervisor and oil lab were blamed early on, even though they were not transferring fuel at the time. One main topwatch triggered the Holland fire suppression system as he exited the space. 3 explosions rocked the ship and the crew went into general quarters. Amid explosions and extreme heat, volunteers from the crew entered enclosed spaces to extinguish the fires and preserve the ship. Through the selfless service of her crew, Connie's main fires were extinguished around 2100, at which time Marines served hot dogs to the exhausted crew in the hangar bay. To the crew's horror, the fires reflashed and the crew went back into action. Into the next day, the crew battled the blaze that had reflashed and continued to threaten the entire ship. During the conflagration, an over-temperature alarm sounded for the MT-23 CIWS 20mm ammunition magazine. This necessitated the fee controlman offloading the magazine contents over the side because low fire main pressure precluded flooding the magazine to cool it. MT-23 was situated on the port side of the island just forward of the boiler uptakes. After the long battle fighting the main space and collateral fires, there were no fatalities. There were however some serious injuries ranging from broken bones to smoke inhalation. Connie pulled back into North Island on August 3. The subsequent investigation showed that there was a problem with a JP-5 pipe leading to a fuel station that wasn't adequately inspected after an in-port maintenance availability period. The problem was that a pipe that had long ago been removed that used to pass through the uptakes was hooked back up. The 6 inches to 8 pipe in the uptakes just emptied into the uptakes where 1 mm's 6 force draft blowers sucked the fuel into the running boilers. The total amount of JP-5 pumped into the uptakes was approximately 20,000 gallons. Round-the-clock repairs by the crew assisted by civilian contractors got the ship ready for deployment, on schedule. The Constellation CVW-14 team deployed on December 1, 1988 for the Indian Ocean. She left port on 3 screws with the final repairs to the 4th screw being completed at Subic Bay, Philippines. 4 days out to sea, a prowler and its 4 crew members were lost at sea. This Westpac deployment ended 6 months later at San Diego on June 1, 1989. = 1990 Euro 1999 = With CVW-9 embarked, Connie departed San Diego on February 12, 1990 for the East Coast. Following exercises with the air forces of several South American countries, including Gringo Gaucho with the Argentine Navy, while en route in preparations at Norfolk, Virginia, Constellation entered Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, PA, in July to begin an $800 million, 3-year service life extension program. Completed in March 1993, the SLEP was a cross between new construction and a comprehensive overhaul, designed to add 15 years to the carrier's operational life. Among other things, her main, largest steam turbines were replaced, an operation that had never been designed into a ship of this size. The Constellation conducted her post-SLEP shakedown with a number of CVW-17 squadrons, and then moored at Mayport, FLA, on April 8. With CVW-2 assigned, Connie departed Mayport on May 29 and conducted exercises with various South American air forces while en route to San Diego, where she arrived on July 22, 1993. During June 1994, Connie and CVW-2 participated in RIMPAC exercises, and on November 10 departed San Diego for an extended deployment for the first time in 6 years. Exercises off Okinawa were followed by a number of exercises off Korea region that had once again become the focus of world attention with the news that North Korea was attempting to develop nuclear weapons. On January 11, 1995, the Constellation Battlegroup entered the Persian Gulf to take up station in support of Operation Southern Watch, enforcing the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. The 6-month deployment concluded with her return to San Diego on May 10. Effective October 1, 1995, Constellation was assigned to Cruiser Destroyer Group 1. The Constellation's next deployment, from April 1 to October 1, 1997, included a return to the Persian Gulf for Southern Watch, now under control of the United States Fifth Fleet. In over 10 weeks of operating in the Gulf, CV-2 flew more than 4,400 sorties, with well over 1,000 Southern Watch sorties. As Connie prepared for her 1999 deployment, tensions were once again rising on the Korean peninsula following an exchange of gunfire between North and South Korean vessels. The Constellation departed San Diego on June 18, 1999 for the Korean peninsula to monitor the situation. On August 28, she entered the Persian Gulf and in 10 weeks conducted more than 5,000 sorties and 1,256 OSW sorties. This period was highlighted by airstrikes against 2 Iraqi radar stations and an attempt by VF-2 to engage an Iraqi jet with the long-range Phoenix air-to-air missile on September 14. CV-2 aircraft engaged in 9 specific ordnance-dropping airstrikes while in the Persian Gulf. The battle group departed the Persian Gulf on November 5, and she arrived home for the holidays on December 17. At the year's end, Constellation was awarded her second battle efficiency as the Pacific Fleet's best carrier for the 12-month reporting period. 2000 onwards. Constellation's 20th deployment began on March 16, 2001. She entered the Persian Gulf on April 30 and immediately commenced operations in support of OSW. On May 13, Captain John W. Miller assumed command as Connie S 30th skipper, and her last. She ceased OSW operations on August 4, having conducted multiple airstrikes in response to Iraqi violations of the no-fly zone. Connie departed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on September 9 with dependents on board for the traditional Tiger cruise on the final leg to San Diego. On September 11 Constellation was nearly halfway between Pearl Harbor and San Diego when word was received of the terrorist attacks on New York and the Pentagon. Despite discussions about turning the battle group around, the carrier was allowed to complete her regularly scheduled deployment. Connie arrived in San Diego on Friday 14 September and celebrated her 40th birthday the next month. Following an abbreviated turnaround cycle, Constellation prepared for her final deployment and the opportunity to fight in the global war on terrorism. She departed on November 2, 2002, leading Cruiser Destroyer Group 1 under the command of Rear Admiral Barry M. Costello. She was soon supporting Operation Enduring Freedom. On December 17 she entered the Persian Gulf to begin OSW missions. On March 19, 2003, with 2 carriers in the eastern Mediterranean and 3 in the Gulf, Operation Iraqi Freedom commenced. Connie was designated a night carrier and remained on station throughout the major ground combat phase. She launched more than 1,500 sorties and CV-2 aircraft delivered over £1.7 million of ordnance. While 1 aircraft was lost in an operational mishap, there were no fatalities. Connie departed the Gulf on April 17 and steamed for San Diego for the last time. On June 1 a Sea Control Squadron 38S-3B Viking crewed by Lieutenant Hartley Perslythwaite, Lieutenant Arthur Gutting and Constellation Commanding Officer, Captain John W. Miller, recorded Constellation's 395,710th and final arrested landing. Her 21st and final deployment ended the next day. Constellation was replaced by USS Ronald Reagan. Decommissioning and scrapping . After 41 years of commissioned service, the USS Constellation was decommissioned at the Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego on August 7, 2003. The ship was towed, beginning September 12, 2003, to the Ghost Fleet at the Naval Inactive Ship Maintenance Facility, Bremerton, Washington. On December 2, 2003, the ship was stricken when Admiral Vern Clark decided against expenditure of maintenance costs. Constellation was placed in Reserve Category X, meaning it received no maintenance or preservation, and only security against fire, flooding, and pilferage was provided. Reserve Category X applies to ships that have been stricken and are awaiting disposal by scrap, sale to foreign countries, as a designated target in a live fire exercise, memorial, or donation, as applicable. As of February 2018, Constellation was scheduled to be disposed of by dismantling in the next 5 years, along with USS Independence. As of January 26, 2012, the Navy's Naval Sea Systems Command posted a notice of solicitation for the towing and complete dismantlement of multiple CV-59/CV-63 class aircraft carriers in the United States, to include ex-USS Forrestal, ex-USS Independence, and ex-USS Constellation. The Constellation will be scrapped at Brownsville, Texas in early 2018. She was towed around Cape Horn on her final voyage. NASA's Operation Icebridge captured a photo south of Punta Arenas, Chile, of the ship being towed to the scrap yard. The carrier arrived at its final resting place in Brownsville on January 16, 2015. In popular culture, in a second-season episode of The $6 Million Man titled Act of Piracy, the Constellation is a part of the United States Second Fleet response to an international crisis in the Caribbean. It appears in alternate sequences with the USS Ranger. In 1989, actors Danny Glover, Willem Dafoe and Brad Johnson spent several weeks aboard the ship interacting with crew members and air crews from VA-196 to get a feel for carrier and naval aviation life, in preparation for their roles in the movie Flight of the Intruder. Constellation appears in the 2001 film Pearl Harbor, portraying the USS Hornet during the takeoff sequences for the Doolittle raid. In September 2000, 4 vintage B-25s took off from the ship while she was steaming off the coast of San Diego, reenacting the feat of Doolittle's raiders. Only the forward part of the flight deck is shown, to mimic the straight deck of the Hornet, though the 2 steam catapults are clearly visible. Some members of the crew were used as extras in the movie. In the Home Improvement television episode At Sea, the Tool-Time cast and crew visit the Connie for a Salute to Engines special. The story of Tiger Cruise, a Disney Channel original movie, takes place aboard the USS Constellation. In computer game Jet Fighter II, the USS Constellation serves as the base of operations in most of players' combat missions. Player can also choose it from 6 available airfields to take off or land it in free flight mode. In the 2010 NCIS episode, Royals and Loyals, the scene resolving the mystery takes place aboard the USS Tripoli. In a brief shot of the ship, it turns out to be a carrier with a sail number clearly visible, 64. In the Avengers film, the SHIELD Helicarrier carries the hull number 64. In the upcoming Chris Roberts space game Star Citizen, one of the spacecraft is named Constellation in honor of the USS Constellation and shares its Connie nickname. See also, List of aircraft carriers, List of aircraft carriers of the United States Navy. References. This article incorporates text from the Public Domain Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships. The entry can be found here. External links, an official U.S. Navy USS Constellation page, official current status of Constellation Nev Shipso, an unofficial USS Constellation webpage, Maritime Quest USS Constellation Cove 64 photo gallery, overhead view of the Constellation in mothballs Google Maps, USS Constellation Association history page, USS Constellation history at U.S. carriers, America's Flagship, a history of USS Constellation by Mike Weeks Naval Aviation News March April 2004.